as well. Okay, so without further ado, Rachel, the group is yours. Thank you so much for participating today.
Thanks, Mary Claire. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us. I did not know that you all were, some of you were going to be such intense participants, and I think that's awesome. So, welcome to your second or third session of the day for those of you who have been with us more than once. So, my name is Rachel Lindsey, and I am the Assistant Director for Career Education at Career Services. I've included my email, and I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So, let's get started. Um, so you have your instructions on chat and all of that. So you've met Mary Claire, and she's going to be our outreach moderator. Please do reach out to her if you have any questions or things that you want to know more about. The other thing that we will ask you to do is go ahead and make sure that you either message her directly or share with her in some way your MasonNet IDs. I will have the slide deck ready to share at the end of our session, but I'm going to need your net IDs to make it happen. So let's do that. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about today is our learning objectives, right? What we're going to do with this next hour and what it means to start planning your path. And so they think that there are two things to really be thinking about. The world of work itself and you, right? You're an important part of what you need to know in order to find that right fit and plan that path that works for you. So as we talk about the world of work, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this today, but I'm going to show you a few resources that you can use to do some research on your own. We're going to spend most of our time focusing on what you need to know about yourself. So really, what are what we call the VIPs? So your values, your interest, your personality, and your skills, and how you kind of put all of that together to figure out what works for you, right? Like what makes sense, what's a good fit. And knowing these things about yourself is really an essential piece of that. So the world of work is really broken down by what we would call industry or career fields. And so in career services, we have an industry focused service model. What that means is that we focus on industries, right, or career fields. A university tends to be organized around schools, colleges, departments, and majors, right? And so you are an English major or a biology major, and you are in the College of Science. But the world of work is organized by industries or employment sectors. And so it's divided by organizations that provide similar goods or similar services. And so when you come into career services, we're not going to have you meet with a member of our staff based on your major. Your major is super important, but if you're thinking about your career beyond college, we know that once you graduate, your major will be less of a focus than the skills and the experiences you have and what you want to do. And so we really want you thinking about planning and finding a pathway based on those things and thinking beyond what your major is called or where it is structured in the university. So if you look at this list of industries or career fields, I'm going to ask everyone to just take a quick second and in the chat box share with us, thinking about your major, which of these industries do you think you could work in? If a couple of folks would be willing to put that in the chat box for me.
And Rachel, I'll be sure to read any aloud as they come in.
Thanks.
Oh boy, they're flooding in. Law
They
and
are.
justice, engineering and education, accounting, arts, financial services.
Okay.
There is something for everybody in this room, I tell you that.
There is, and I think here's
Health,
even the okay, the most important question. As you look at this list and you think about your major, do you see anything here that absolutely isn't an option for you? And what I'm going to ask you to do is put your major and the industry you think would be challenging.
your major in the industry you think would be challenging. Okay.
Yes, please.
Not many are coming in, Rachel. Here we go.
Ah,
That's a
okay, we've
good
got,
one.
yes, your current major.
Finance to a nonprofit. Public policy intelligence analyst.
Okay. So I see a few undecided. Well, sure, exploring is probably going to be a little tricky to do a direct match. But here's what I would say based on what I'm looking at. For example, I'm seeing things like IT and tourism. And I think that's a great example of um, a place where if the major is IT, certainly the tourism industry has lots of places where IT is a fit, right? And so I'm thinking about things like websites like Kayak or Airbnb, right? Things where we need IT to do our booking, we need IT to depending on which kind of IT you're in, right? We might need it for booking, we might need it to do website design for our um, tourist hotspots, even things like Yelp, right? So when you think about how much of what we do involves needing to get online, right? To plan our vacations, to book our tickets, to book our hotel or wherever we're going to stay. I see accounting and green and sustainability. Um, so what's interesting is I think all of these industries require someone to do accounting, right? Right. Um, all of these organizations will be required to track and manage their finances, probably submit some kind of record to the government, whether they're a nonprofit, whether they're for profit. So that's a really good example too of a place where um, those are functions that exist in all of these industries. So I think I saw a couple of finance related ones. And I'm looking at these and I'm thinking they probably all need someone to help with their finances. I want to see if saw any others that really struck me. So, cybersecurity, engineering, and the arts. That's a great one too. Um, I think all of our industries, again, have a need for those specific job functions. And that's something to think about is the difference between the industry, which is kind of the area of work where we focus, and those very specific job functions that you might do in that work, right? So I might be a counselor, right? I happen to be a career counselor, but I actually work in the education industry, working here at George Mason. So those are things to think about as you think about where you might work and what you might do when you get there, and how those two might be a little bit different. So as you are starting to think about what industry, sort of what area of work you want to do, I want you to see that we have on the Career Services website a page that is specifically dedicated to industry specific resources. And that whole long list that you saw on that last slide, we have a page for each of those here. And we're not going to get into all of that today, but I wanted you to see it. And I have put a URL here. So when you get the slide deck, or if you want to copy and paste it, or write it down somewhere, this is a place where you can start doing that research now on your own and really start looking at um, things like tips and tricks to get started in these industries, education you might need, some sample job descriptions that you can evaluate, and things like that. So there's a lot there to really help you get a sense of what's going on. Each industry page also has information about the career services industry advisor for this particular industry or career field. And if you wanted to meet with that person and learn more, you could make an appointment through Handshake. And that's just handshake.gmu.edu for those of you who haven't played with Handshake yet. So those are some of the places to get started. We also have some resources for doing a little bit more exploring, right? Those of you who are trying to learn a little bit more about yourselves. We're going to do some of this today, but you may find you still have questions after our session. And if so, there are a lot more hands-on activities and ways to connect with University Career Services career counselors for more one-on-one guidance on this page. So I just wanted you to see it. I wanted you to have quick, easy access to a URL that would help you find us later. And know that we are going to talk for an hour today, but we may not solve all of your questions or find all of your answers in that hour. And if you feel like you need to talk to either a career counselor or an industry advisor, you can always find us at Handshake to schedule those appointments. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, and we started talking about this a little, but I like this diagram because I think it really illustrates the point, is that you may have a lot of different options and pathways with your degree. And so your choice of degree creates options, but it doesn't define your career or your job prospects. Your major, experiences, skills, your motivations, the job market, personal circumstances, and luck even really all play a role in determining your first step after Mason. So here are some examples of different ways that Mason grads have used their biology degree. And you can see how the different experiences they've had shape outcomes. And so we have two folks who volunteered at a hospital. Um, One of them realized that based on that experience, medical school was not for them, but became a middle school biology teacher. Another person who volunteered at a hospital got really excited about that possibility and became a pediatrician. We also have someone who wasn't admitted to medical school after all, um, but managed to find a really interesting management training opportunity and go a very different route. And so I think that the thing about this that I really wanted to show you is just the many different ways that you can shape your outcomes based on your experiences and what you want to do with your degree. Um, so I think we've talked about it. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot more time on it. But if you're finding that you just are unclear on what the outcome with your degree is, this is a great way to start testing those things. So as you think about where your degree can take you, just take a few minutes to imagine, if you would, um, that you're creating your dream job. Nothing's stopping you. You have no concerns about education, time, money, location, or confidence. So the job pays well. You have the perfect education and work experience to qualify. It's exactly what you want, and it makes you happy. Don't worry if you don't know the answers to all of these questions yet, but this activity is to help you explore possibilities. And again, you can always reach out to us for more help. And so this is a really good place to start, is just thinking about what some of these, what some of your answers to these questions are. And so we're going to spend a couple of minutes just checking it out. Right, and so as you start to think about some of the answers to these questions, if you want to start sharing a few answers in the chat box with us here and there, um, do you feel like you know what you're going to be doing or how or why you're working? Do you have a strong sense of where you hope that that work will be? And does it matter? Do you know the mission of the company? Does the mission matter? Does that feel like a piece that really helps you decide where you want to be and how you want to be there? So as you're thinking, again, please feel free to share with us if you'd like to. any thoughts you have about the how, the why, um, the what, the where. And if those are all things that you're really still thinking through, that's okay. And you can share that with us too, because I think it's helpful for us to hear from other folks when they're still thinking and they're still exploring.
So Rachel, a comment came in that a student had been thinking about the recent situation with the COVID pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
prioritizing telework for that.
Mm. Okay.
A lot of sense.
It does. And that's one of the things that we talked about a slide or two ago, right? The idea that luck and life circumstances can often be really big impacts on what makes sense for you and where and how you want to be in your workplace. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a smart thing to think about.
Completely.
Hmm.
Another student comments that it's a struggle to envision themselves at a company because the dream job is to support themselves 100% freelance.
Ah, okay.
It then also goes
Okay.
on to say it's kind of a pipe dream, but I'm going to go ahead and say maybe not.
Maybe, maybe not, right? And so one of the things to really think about is how to get there from here. And we might not have that answer yet, but certainly really sitting down and thinking through strategy and what are the steps that get you there and what you might do in the meantime, right? So if that's the stretch goal, then what are the chunks that you want to pursue to help you move towards that? Anything else that we should talk about before we um, kind of transition into our next thought?
We have one more that came through. Let's see
Hmm.
here. A couple came through at once. A student comments that they'd love to work in Asia in a job related to money or finance. They'd love to travel for business, work in an office in a big city.
Okay.
Too.
Okay. So that's a pretty complete set of visions, right? And again, it's all about strategy and how to get there. Um, and then I see sort of passion project in your free time, and that's something that a lot of people do as well, right? Thinking about what I want to do to support myself and whether or not what I support myself with is also what I will do that is the thing that I love, right? Really good way to think about it. So, for those of you who are still trying to think about what the answers to some of these questions are, let's talk more about who you are, right? Like your VIPs. So those values, interests, personality traits, and skills that can really help you uncover your career path and your work environment that makes sense. So the first thing I have for you here, and each of these is a fillable PDF, and I wanted you to have them in this way because this way you can download and save the documents and refer to them later. So you can actually sit and start doing some of this work now if you want, um, or if you want to just kind of start thinking about it while we talk. But if you're still thinking and you want to keep thinking and reflecting, you have an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just start looking at um, this worksheet and start filling out some of those answers as you feel ready. You're looking for the URL in the chat box. I can do that. 1 second and let me pull it up.
It was suspiciously hard for me to copy, Rachel. Thank you for doing that.
Sure, I'm actually not going to put the tiny URL in because it doesn't seem to want to do that. But the link should work. And when I send you all the slide deck, you'll have the tiny URL and you'll be able to just hopefully copy and paste that directly into a browser. Oh, and thank you. Yes. So if you are wanting the slide deck for later, make sure that we do get your net ID and that way we can get you all checked into Handshake and send that email. And so really all this sheet is asking you to do is use the scale below to rate how strongly you possess or demonstrate these traits on a consistent basis. Um, and this is not like a quiz to see how many of them you're good at, or how good of an employee you'd be, but it's really thinking about those traits that you have that you would like to continue to pursue, and thinking about which of them show up in job descriptions and in uh, sort of position descriptions as things that are useful or important to have, and if you feel like you have them. And that's a great way to start seeing if things are a good fit. And then, of course, the second piece of this activity is to really think about your strongest traits and how they show up in your lives. So, for each of those really strongest traits, if you can think of a specific example from work or from life when you demonstrated them effectively. And so, for those of you who might be ready, if you would share with us in the chat box um, a strength that you rated as high, um, or a strength that you were surprised to see show up in the list, or that you feel like you possess but you didn't realize was a strength that would be something you would recognize. Fast learner, yeah. Thorough. And so these personal traits, they're things that are either natural or developed qualities that you can bring to performing your work. Um, and as you think about those things, sometimes students express surprise that certain things on the list are considered strengths, because they feel like everybody does that. And I'm wondering if some of you are looking at the things on this list and thinking, oh, I do that. I didn't know that was like special or exciting. Is that something that some of you are seeing as you look at this list, or are surprised to discover a thing that you do is considered a strength? All right. So again, I would invite all of you to download this form. Keep playing with it, keep working with it. You'll notice there's a step 3 here too, to maybe gather feedback. This is totally optional if you feel like doing it. So it's not saving properly. Okay. That I cannot troubleshoot for you right this moment. If you've started filling things in, you might want to try just screenshot for now and then as the slide deck comes through, you might be able to, okay. Um, so yeah, one of the things that you might consider doing that could be optional is emailing a copy of this form to those folks that are sort of your trusted peers, or even just asking them. You know, if you were going to pick like 5 strengths that you think I bring to the table, things I do really well, what would you recommend? And sometimes you'll be surprised to learn what strengths people see that you bring to the table. But it might be really helpful as you're thinking about what you do and what you want to do. So we're going to move on. We've talked about personality. We're going to talk now about values. And so I'm going to give you a little bit more time to play with the values activity. And so I'm going to, again, key in and then copy and paste for you, but it's going to take just 1 second. All right, and so this is a values assessment activity that we're going to look at now. It's a fillable PDF that you can download and refer to again later. The thing to think about with values is that understanding what gives you meaning and motivates you can really help you make career decisions that align with your true needs. So values are things that are important to you, and they may change over time. Sometimes they can compete. And work-related values can often underlie our choices about work. So some people value creativity. Others place a premium on income or on contributing. Um, right now, somebody mentioned earlier the idea of placing a premium on remote work, right? Because safety and health considerations are high values right now for a lot of us. So thinking about different values and how they can show up in your life and in the ways that you think about work are going to be really useful, I think. So step 1 is going to be to review that values checklist and just put a check mark next to your top 6 to 8 activity-based values. These are values that are critical to identifying the work activities that will be most satisfying to you. And then you can identify 6 to 8 work life and environment values in that other column. And they can help you clarify elements in the work setting and organizational culture that are essential to your satisfaction. So that's step 1, is just checking kind of the top 6 to 8. And for some folks, that's tricky because it really does mean having to make some choices, right? Having to limit yourself and having to prioritize. But that's a piece of thinking about what is most important to you in work. So just take a couple of minutes and go ahead and start looking at those things. As you move through them, step 2 is going to be those activity-based values. And starting to look at how those things sort of overlap and come together. All right. So I realize this was kind of a longer list, and you might have had to spend some time really thinking about what those values are and having to prioritize. Did anyone find it challenging to have to pick only 6 or 8 items off of these lists? If you would just put that in the chat box for me. So I have one definitely. Okay, so having to sort of pick and prioritize, right? Yeah, it can be really challenging. And I think the important thing to really start thinking about is how you might navigate um, a job search where all of these things might not exist in one space, and how you might pick um, your priorities, right? And particularly if your work life values might include things like a balanced lifestyle and family and friendships. Um, but your workplace values might really involve things like achievement and adventure and competition, right? And sometimes those things may be a little tricky to find in one same workplace. And so that doesn't mean you can't have them or you shouldn't have them or that you can't take those jobs. But I think it does make it really extra important to think about what you might do if those values end up being in conflict or if it's a little tricky to navigate that. Were any of these things on the list things that surprised you a little bit to see? Things that you wouldn't have thought that's a real workplace value for me? Okay, so it doesn't surprise you all that these were the things that people prioritize, but the tricky part really was figuring out which of them are your priorities. And again, that's okay and that's fair. And none of your lists probably look the same, and that's also really important to know. And it's always going to be thinking about what you are going to do when it's time for you to start picking your priorities. And some of that might mean what kind of careers you're picking, but some of it might just mean the kind of workplace specifically. Do I want to work at a busy corporate Fortune 500 place? Would I rather take my talent to a smaller company or maybe a nonprofit because what they do aligns with some of these values or supports these values differently? And so those are things to be thinking about as you do that research. And so that's why I shared with you those industry research resources earlier, is to give you that place to start doing that, looking into things. And the next thing is your interests. What do I really like to do? And so again, I'm going to go ahead and pull up for you the URL and put it in the chat box. Hopefully that works for you a little more easily than the other ones did, but let me know if it is creating any challenges. It did work for me, so hopefully you all are also having luck with it. Um, and so the question is, why is it important to look at your interests? And the answer is pretty easy, although I think sometimes we forget that it's important. And activities people engage in and the work environments in our society can be categorized by these kind of sets of common characteristics. And the more compatible your interests are with the work environment you're in, the greater success and satisfaction you're likely to experience. And so sometimes I think some of us have been taught to think that whether or not it's interesting is not so important. But what we know is that people who are in work that is a good fit for their interests tend to have more success and more satisfaction there. And so as you look at each of the 6 theme descriptions here, um, for people and interest and skills, and then in the spaces at the bottom, write the names of the 3 themes that you think best describe you. Um, in order. So what's the one that best describes you? What's the second best? And what's the third best? And make special note of the words that best describe you with within each of these 3 themes, maybe even using the highlighting tool in the toolbar if you can. But if not, just make sure you're making notes somewhere. And one of the things that is kind of nice about this set of handouts and activities is that if you look back at the values that we did a second ago, you'll see that it references these groupings as well. So that's a good way to start pulling these things together instead of feeling like you have kind of a pile of handouts. You actually have several activities that really do help you pull it all together. And if anyone would be willing to share in the chat box with us, um, what theme did you feel like described you best? Did you see something, read it over, and say, aha, that's me? That theme, social or conventional? Okay, investigative. Okay, so we have a lot of social and a lot of investigative folks. And I think what's helpful here is to really start thinking about from those categories, investigative and artistic, which of those words from those categories really struck you? What made you think, oh yeah, this is the one that sounds like me? And if anyone wants to share what that word or those couple of words were that really resonated. Ah, okay. So a lot of the words on that list really, really struck you. Okay. So I see some investigative words and things, learning and solving problems, analyzing and evaluating. Yep. Okay, you know what? That's a really good thing to point out too. So someone has mentioned that um, things that looked really unappealing to them, and they were able to rule those out. Um, and so I think thinking about how you're going to apply this to your career search, right, and your career development. Um, I'm thinking about things like that your major probably doesn't really specifically tell you which of these things will show up in your work. But as you start to really look at job functions and industries and what the expectations are in the position descriptions that you're looking at, it'll be a great way to come back to this list and say, um, for example, must be a creative problem solver. If that's something that really resonated with you today, then hopefully you'll read that job description and say, aha, this is a good choice for me. Whereas looking at something like following through on others' instructions does not sound like how I want to spend my time. And so this is maybe not a position that's a great fit. And so hopefully this is giving you a sense of the different ways that you can evaluate the possibilities and really think about what works for you and what maybe doesn't work for you. And so then the next thing we're really going to talk about are skills. Um, and so through your career, you're going to need and want to learn new skills and build on your existing skills and stay current in your field. And that way you can advance more. Um, so these transferable skills, the ones across the top, these are the things that are sort of central to helping you think more flexibly about your career options. Um, and knowing that you don't have to be an expert in all of these skills before you graduate. Um, but employers do look, and graduate programs too, look for students who have experience regardless of academic major. And so these transferable skills across the top, these are things that across the board employers do expect you to have. They're some of the most in-demand transferable skills. And they're the things that really prepare you as a college graduate for a successful transition into the workplace. Um, and LinkedIn Learning, which I have the URL for at the bottom and you all have access to as Mason students, is a great place to figure out ways to develop some of these transferable skills. Your depth of knowledge, the other piece of this, is that sort of technical or discipline specific skill. That's your major, right? That's the stuff that's really unique and specific to what you're studying. So things like biology or literature or history, and even more so if you specialize in some kind of very unique area of study. That's that depth of knowledge and expertise. But across the board, these other pieces are going to be important. And that is something to be thinking about, is where am I building these skills and how am I demonstrating these skills? What have I done or what could I do? And if you're thinking, I just don't know, that's okay. Don't panic. Don't think that this means that your luck after graduation is going to be really limited, but rather think about coming and talking to us even at Career Services, because we I think often think of places that you maybe even have used and demonstrated these skills and you haven't thought of them. And we can help you think about how to talk about them to other people, which I think is also helpful. So the next piece of this is starting to connect the skills that you think you do have to good career options. And so let me again copy for you all this URL. And what you'll see is a slightly different version of the skill wheel that I put up for you. And this is a resource that I want you to have. It's not an assessment of skills, but you can do this assessment for free with our office if you want. You can also just review it. And so we talked a little bit already about all of the skills that we know employers want, things like communication and teamwork and leadership and the ability to use technology and critical thinking and problem solving. Um, but what I think it's really important to think about is which of those skills do you most want to focus on? Because while employers want all of these skills, certainly some of them are more important in some positions than others and will play a more significant role. So thinking about what you want to do at the core of the job. Do you want to be providing administrative support? Are you someone who enjoys and is skilled at organizing information, setting up systems, and coordinating things? Do you want to help people by connecting them to services or resources, by listening to them, resolving issues and training? Are you skilled at investigating and researching issues, writing concisely, creating and delivering presentations? Do you do research and write about things like science or human rights or pop culture? Um, so I would invite you to sit and really just look at this, circle, highlight, print out, whatever helps you kind of visualize this. But I would love it if some of you would be willing to share in the chat box what your most favorite skills, what your preferred skills are, the things that you feel you do well and or where you'd like to spend your time. Okay, so we have someone who is interested in counseling or teaching or providing support services and building or creating structure. Okay. So I think that that could come together to create a really interesting kind of a position. We have someone who definitely wants to analyze. It's an interest and it's a skill. Um, okay. And as you think about some of the other things that we looked at today, some of the values and some of the personality traits, are you seeing how they maybe overlap or come together in some places? Another way to think about this is if you are seeing skills that you think would be interesting to use, but you still feel like you might need to build them a little. Um, if you would share those too with us in the chat box, I think that could be really interesting to think about. And so the last thing I want to make sure that we do today is really think about how all of this pulls together and how all these little bits and pieces create like a bigger picture for you. So one more thing to really think about as you start pulling all of this together is this list of kind of other questions. So you know what you like, you know what's interesting, you know what you're good at, you know what you care about. What else do you need to know? Um, and also, what should you know just beyond the salary? So things like job market and outlook, employer reputation, what kind of education and training you might need. Um, Sometimes we have ideas about what we'd like to do, and then we discover the amount of training that goes into it, and we think, maybe not yet. Maybe there's a place I'd rather start before I get into all of that training. Or, okay, if this is what I need to do, then this is what I will do, but I'm glad to know that this is what has to happen for me to get there. Um, what kind of skills and competencies are required, right? And certainly we've looked today a bit at which of those you feel like you have and which ones you'd like to develop. Um, Things like if there are internships available, can you start getting some of that hands-on experience? Are there related occupations, things that maybe are a slightly better fit or don't require that education just yet, but would let you start getting some experience? Um, are there things like licenses or certification or even security clearance that you might need to complete in order to be fully prepared for that job? Because those are all pieces that sometimes surprise us. And I hate for you all to be in a place of having a goal and feeling like you've got a pathway, but not knowing that there are these last few bits that could come between you and that goal. So make sure you're looking into those things as you start to pull things together. When you go back to those resources on the first couple of slides, the industry research pages and things like that, these are things to make sure you're looking for and considering as you make your choices. And then you start to put it all together, right? So after you know your values, your interests, your personality, and your skills, and you know more about the kinds of work environments that are out there, you can better decide what kind of job function you want. So, like, what's the actual thing I want to do? What's my job target? What's the goal? Do I want to be? Where do I want to be? How much do I want to be making? What do I want to be doing? And you'll know how to find your resources to help you find those goals. And so that's how all these pieces eventually come together. And with that, I just want to open it up for any other questions that you all might have. I know that folks have been sharing their net IDs so that they can get the slide deck. If you would make sure to keep doing that, I'd appreciate it. But other than that, what questions can we answer for you? What do you hope to know?
So just remember, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A or you can use the chat to the side of the screen. And for all of you that have been using the Q&A to put in your net IDs, thank you. I've copied them all down, and we will be sure to get you those slides.
This is a great question. Can you change course after you graduate? Absolutely. Most of us will have multiple careers, multiple jobs in our lives. How easy it is to change course will depend on how dramatic a change it is, I think. So if, for example, you are an English major who has never taken a science course beyond your Mason core and you decide you want to go to med school, that might be a little challenging just because there might be a lot of steps to take. But certainly, if, for example, you start working in some kind of a field and realize it's just not the right fit, there are lots of ways to start thinking about what that transition could look like. I think it's so important to remember that none of these decisions is ever permanent. I mean, what the degree on your transcript is will be permanent, but beyond that, picking a major is picking what you'll study and what you'll get subject matter expertise in, but it's not picking the one and only thing you'll ever do in your life. Does that kind of get to what the question that you had was? Another really excellent question. How do you start to get that experience? There are a lot of ways to start getting experience. I think If you have a really specific direction you're headed, I would recommend certainly making an appointment with your industry advisor in Handshake, so that you can really sit down and strategize with them and talk about the specific sort of preferred experiences in a particular industry. But generally, there's a wide variety of things that are good ways to start getting experience. It might be working. It might be either full-time or part-time jobs in the areas that are relevant, getting industry experience, even if it's not the exact position. It might be volunteering. It might be an internship. It might be some kind of a campus leadership position or a community leadership position. It might be doing research. So there are a lot of different versions of ways to get experience. Which one is the best will have a lot to do with what kind of employers you're looking at and what industry you're in. So that's a really important question to get kind of that deep dive, do your research, whether it's on that website that I shared with you, whether it's through an appointment with someone in career services, whether it's talking to the folks in your network who maybe you're doing the stuff you think you want to do. There are a lot of different ways to get that experience. Are there other questions? We're right about at time, but I want to give you all maybe 2 more opportunities to ask questions if there are things that you feel like you just would like to know a little bit more about before you walk away today.
Back.
Yes.
I think that about does it. Last call on questions. Okay. Well, to everybody who requested the slides, please give Rachel and I some turnaround time, but I'm sure we'll be getting those to you soon.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for attending. And Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Of course. And thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Mary Claire, for your help.
You know, I do what I can. And to all of you still on the line, please look at the UCS Career Services event calendar. Check out the other JumpStart workshops. We got a full day tomorrow. We start with virtual interviewing at 11 o'clock. And of course, our Prepare for the Fall Fairs webinar, which I believe is in the 3 o'clock hour. So you won't want to miss those. So thank you so much for participating. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their afternoon. Bye.